A few years ago, I needed a big change in my life. My money, mental health, and overall life were getting worse. The city streets were filled with noise, more homeless people, needles, and cracked pipes. I had no family to keep me there. My parents had passed away, and I barely talked to my siblings. So, I sold everything I owned and moved to a small cabin in the middle of Alaska's tall mountains and dark forests. For the first 3 months, the quiet was nice. The northern lights danced in the winter sky, and the beauty of nature surrounded me. I had a rifle and a shotgun for hunting, a small garden for food, and a solar panel for electricity. It felt like paradise. But soon, I realized that my problems had followed me. One day, while exploring the cabin, I found an old leather book left by the person who lived here before me. The first entry was dated January 9th, 2015, and it told about a man who thought the cabin was paradise, only to be scared by a twisted, thin figure that hid in the shadows. The creature's eyes were rotted and dark, and it moved in a slow, jerky way. The diary ended with a blood-stained page and a scary note. The twisted man is leading me to the truth. Today, I will finally find it. I tried to ignore the diary as the thoughts of a crazy person, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. One night, I woke up to the sound of static from the TV. When I looked closer, I saw a live feed of my cabin. As I stared in horror, a pale, naked man with a twisted spine appeared behind me. His long, broken fingers reached for my shoulders, and a hissing voice whispered, "He is watching you." Terrified, I decided to leave the cabin. I put on heavy clothes, grabbed my shotgun, and went to my neighbor Steve's cabin. Steve, an old hunter, seemed surprised to see me so late. I explained my situation, and he let me stay the night. As I lay on Steve's couch, I noticed a black binder among his books. Inside were news clippings about missing people and murders, including the person who owned my cabin before me. Suddenly, I heard the click of a gun. Steve stood behind me, his eyes cold and dead. "How do you like my work, friend?" he asked. In that moment, I realized Steve was the real monster. He had killed the previous owner and many others. Just as he was about to shoot me, the twisted man appeared behind him. Steve screamed as the creature's long fingers cut through his neck. I grabbed my shotgun and fired, killing Steve instantly. The twisted man grinned at me before disappearing into the shadows. I finally understood that the creature had been trying to warn me all along. As I left the cabin, I saw the twisted man wave at me from the doorway. I waved back and headed into town, determined to leave this nightmare behind. I thought leaving the cabin would end the nightmares, but they followed me. Every night, I dreamt of the twisted man. He would stand at my window, his dark eyes peering in. Sometimes, I would see his long fingers tapping on the glass. I woke up sweating, heart pounding. One night, I decided to go back to the cabin. I needed answers. When I arrived, the place was as I left it. Snow covered the ground, and everything was quiet. I went inside and looked for clues. The black diary was still there. I opened it to the last page and read the blood-stained words again. "The twisted man is leading me to the truth." I searched the cabin for anything that might help. In the basement, I found a hidden door. It led to a small, dark room. Inside, there were old photos, maps, and strange symbols on the walls. One photo caught my eye. It was of the previous owner, Will, and a woman. They looked happy, but something was off. The woman's eyes were scratched out. I decided to visit Steve's cabin again, hoping to find more information. When I arrived, the place was eerily silent. Inside, it looked like Steve had left in a hurry. Papers were scattered everywhere, and the smell of decay lingered. I found another diary, this one belonging to Steve. In Steve's diary, he talked about his obsession with the twisted man. He wrote about how he had seen the creature in the forest and how it had spoken to him. Steve believed the twisted man was trying to show him something, a hidden truth. He became paranoid, convinced that the creature was always watching. As I read, I realized Steve had gone mad. He wrote about hearing voices, seeing shadows, and feeling the creature's presence even in daylight. The last entry was chilling. The twisted man is here. I can feel his breath on my neck. Tonight, I will finally understand. Determined to end this nightmare, I decided to confront the twisted man. I returned to my cabin and waited for nightfall. As darkness fell, I heard the familiar tapping on the window. I turned to see the twisted man standing there, his eyes locked on mine. I grabbed my shotgun and stepped outside. The air was cold, and the forest was silent. The twisted man moved slowly, his twisted body casting long shadows. He raised a hand, pointing towards the hidden room in the basement. I followed him, feeling a strange calm wash over me. In the basement, the twisted man stood in the corner, his eyes fixed on a spot on the wall. I approached and saw a small, hidden compartment. Inside, there was an old, dusty book. As I opened the book, a wave of understanding hit me. The twisted man was a guardian, protecting a dark secret hidden in the cabin. The previous owner, Will, had tried to uncover it and paid the price. Steve had fallen into madness trying to understand it, and now it was my turn. The book revealed the truth about the land, the dark rituals performed here, and the creature's role as a guardian. The twisted man had been trying to protect me, just as he had tried to protect Will and Steve. But the darkness was too strong. I closed the book and looked at the twisted man. He nodded slowly as if understanding my decision. I knew I had to leave, to abandon the cabin and its dark secrets. As I walked away, I felt the twisted man's eyes on me, watching, always watching. After my narrow escape from Steve's cabin, I returned to town, trying to forget the horrors I had witnessed. But the memories haunted me. I couldn't shake the feeling that the twisted man was still watching me. I decided to dig deeper into the cabin's history, hoping to find more clues about the dark secret it held. I visited the local library, searching through old newspapers and records. I found articles about strange disappearances and mysterious deaths in the area. People had been vanishing for years, and no one had ever found out why. The more I read, the more I realized that the cabin had a dark past, connected to a series of gruesome events. One article mentioned a man named William Lennox, who had lived in the cabin before Will. William had also experienced strange sightings and had written about a twisted figure haunting him. His journal entries were eerily similar to Will's. It seemed the twisted man had been around for a long time, guarding the cabin's dark secret. Determined to find answers, I decided to explore the forest around the cabin. Armed with my shotgun and a flashlight, I ventured into the woods at dusk. The air was cold, and the trees cast long shadows on the ground. Every rustle and snap of a twig made my heart race. As I walked deeper into the forest, I noticed strange symbols carved into the trees. They looked ancient, like something out of a nightmare. I followed the symbols, feeling a strange pull guiding me. The forest grew darker and more oppressive, and I felt the twisted man's presence growing stronger. I came across a clearing with an old stone altar in the center. It was covered in moss and surrounded by more of the strange symbols. As I approached, I felt a chill run down my spine. The air seemed to thicken, and I heard whispers all around me. I knew I had found the source of the cabin's dark power. I examined the altar, finding more clues about the dark rituals performed there. It seemed the cabin was built on a site of ancient dark magic. The twisted man was a guardian, bound to protect the secrets buried there. I realized that Will, Steve, and William had all been drawn to this place, their curiosity leading to their doom. As I stood by the altar, I felt a presence behind me. I turned to see the twisted man, his eyes glowing in the dim light. He didn't move, just watched me with his dark, empty eyes. I knew I had to confront him, to break the cycle of horror that had trapped so many before me. I spoke to the twisted man, asking him what he wanted. His voice was a whisper, filled with sadness and pain. To protect, he said, to guard the secret. I realized that he wasn't my enemy. He was a victim, trapped by the dark magic that bound him to this place. I knew I had to destroy the altar, to break the curse and free the twisted man. I took my shotgun and aimed it at the stone, firing until it shattered. As the altar crumbled, I felt a surge of energy, and the twisted man let out a cry of relief. He faded into the darkness, finally free. I left the forest, feeling a weight lifted from my shoulders. The nightmare was over. The cabin's dark secret was destroyed, and the twisted man was no longer a threat. I returned to town, ready to start a new life, free from the horrors of the past. With the twisted man gone, I felt a strange mix of relief and sadness. I returned to town, determined to start fresh. I found a small, cozy apartment and began rebuilding my life. I got a job at the local bookstore, where the quiet environment helped soothe my nerves. But the memories of the cabin and the twisted man never truly left me. On quiet nights, I would sit by the window, watching the stars and thinking about the strange events that had unfolded. The forest, the cabin, and the twisted man felt like a distant dream, but the lessons I learned stayed with me. One day, I decided to visit the old cabin one last time. I needed closure. As I walked through the now familiar forest, I felt a sense of peace. The air was crisp, and the birds sang softly. When I reached the cabin, I saw that nature had begun to reclaim it. Vines grew over the walls, and the grass was tall and wild. I stood there for a long time, reflecting on everything that had happened. The twisted man, the dark secrets, and the haunted forest. It was all behind me now. I whispered a silent thank you to the twisted man for his protection and turned to leave. As I walked away, I felt a sense of finality. The nightmare was over, and I could finally move on with my life. I left the forest, knowing I would never return. My new life awaited, filled with hope and promise. Months after the events at the cabin, I thought the nightmare was behind me. I had settled into my new life, working at the bookstore and making new friends. One evening, as I was closing up the store, I received a call from an unknown number. "Hello?" I answered, curiosity tinged with unease. "He's back," a voice whispered on the other end. My heart skipped a beat. It was a woman's voice, filled with fear. "The twisted man has returned." I felt a chill run down my spine. "Who is this?" "Eliza," she replied. "The twisted man is here. He needs your help." I hung up, shaken. Eliza was the name of the woman whose picture I had found in the old chest at the cabin. I knew I couldn't ignore this call. I had to return to the forest and face the twisted man once more. The next day, I packed my bags and drove back to the small town near the cabin. As I approached the forest, memories of my previous encounters flooded back. I parked my car at the edge of the woods and began the familiar hike to the cabin. The forest felt different this time, darker and more foreboding. I felt the twisted man's presence before I even saw him. As I reached the cabin, I saw Eliza standing at the edge of the clearing. She looked exactly as she did in the photograph, unchanged by time. "You came," she said, her voice soft and relieved. "What's happening?" I asked, my voice trembling. "The twisted man is not evil," she explained. "He is a guardian, but his power is fading. We need to help him." Eliza led me to the hidden room in the cabin's basement. The symbols on the walls seemed to glow with a strange light. "We need to perform a ritual to restore his power," she said, handing me a small, ornate dagger. I hesitated, but Eliza's determined gaze reassured me. We stood before the broken altar, and I began to recite the words Eliza had taught me. The air grew thick with energy, and the room seemed to pulse with life. As I finished the incantation, the twisted man appeared, his form more solid and less twisted. He nodded at me, his eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice echoing in the room. Eliza smiled, tears in her eyes. "He is free now." I felt a sense of relief wash over me. The twisted man had found peace, and so had I. I left the forest, knowing I had done the right thing. The nightmare was finally over. Months passed, and life settled into a peaceful routine. The memories of the twisted man and the dark secrets of the cabin faded into the background. One crisp autumn morning, I received a letter with no return address. Inside was a single photograph of the cabin, now overgrown and reclaimed by nature, and a note that read, "Thank you." I knew it was from Eliza, a final farewell and a token of gratitude. The twisted man and the haunted cabin were now part of the past, but their story would always remain with me. I smiled, feeling a sense of closure and peace. Story 2. I was very bored one night, and bad things happen when there's nothing to keep me busy. I found myself looking at old or strange websites. Seeing an old Space Jam site still up felt like a trip down memory lane. Through random clicks, I found a site claiming to be a monster dating site. The whole thing went down before I could get a good look at it, but I read that it could only be accessed at midnight. The next night, I counted down the seconds until midnight and refreshed the page. The site went live, looking like something from the early internet days. I didn't plan on making a dating profile, just wanted to look around. The homepage showed a few dating profiles of monsters with grainy images. Out of curiosity, I made a fake profile using a burner email address. My time ran out, and the site went down. I thought it was all a joke until I got a text message from an unknown number saying a date was set for 1 p.m. next Friday at a nearby street corner. My heart sank. How did they get my number? I deleted the message, blocked the number, and changed all my passwords. But the fear stayed. On Friday night, a friend asked me to bring him some soup. It was late, and I was nervous, but I couldn't say no. On my way back, I heard a voice behind me. "Mr. Stevens," it said. I stopped dead in my tracks. A tall, dark shape made of fluttering papers and with sharp teeth came out of the darkness. I ran, but the creature kept up, laughing as it chased me. I hid in a park among the trees. The laughter stopped, and I didn't hear the paper moving anymore. But when I tried to call for help, my phone wouldn't turn on, showing a glowing golden symbol instead. Golden writing flickered on the leaves around me, showing the outline of the monster. I woke up in my bed, bruised and sore, wearing the same clothes from the night before. In the kitchen, a tall, beautiful person with golden eyes and dark skin was making breakfast. They wore my clothes and introduced themselves as Guild. They handed me a handful of human teeth turned into gold and told me not to be late for our next date. The nightmare wasn't over. I had to keep seeing Guild, a monster disguised as a human, until they decided to eat me. My life was now in their hands. I texted my sister, telling her I loved her, fearing Guild might come back at any moment. Days passed, and I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every time I left the house, I felt eyes on me. One night, I received another text from Guild. "I'm coming over," it read. My heart pounded in my chest. I tried to ignore it, hoping it was just a prank. But soon, I heard a knock on the door. I froze, not wanting to answer. The knock came again, louder this time. I slowly opened the door, and there stood Guild, smiling with those golden eyes. Guild stepped inside, looking around my small apartment. "I've missed you," they said, their voice smooth and cold. I backed away, trying to keep my distance. "What do you want from me?" I asked, my voice trembling. Guild laughed softly. "I just want to spend time with you. Is that too much to ask?" They moved closer, and I could see their eyes change, becoming darker and more sinister. Guild spent the evening at my place, making themselves comfortable. They cooked dinner, talking casually as if nothing was wrong. But I could feel the tension in the air, the danger lurking beneath their calm exterior. After dinner, Guild sat on the couch, patting the seat next to them. "Come, sit with me," they said. I hesitated, but fear forced me to obey. As I sat down, Guild placed a hand on my shoulder. Their touch was ice cold, sending shivers down my spine. "Tell me about your day," Guild said, their eyes boring into mine. I stammered, trying to find words. As I spoke, Guild's grip tightened, and I could feel their nails digging into my skin. "I want to know everything," they whispered. As the night went on, I became more and more scared. Guild's presence was suffocating, their gaze never leaving me. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I needed to get away. "I need to use the bathroom," I said, my voice shaky. Guild nodded, watching as I stood up. In the bathroom, I locked the door and took a deep breath. I had to find a way to escape. I opened the window and climbed out, careful not to make any noise. The cold night air hit my face as I ran, not looking back. I didn't stop until I reached a friend's house, pounding on the door until they let me in. I told my friends everything, and they called the police. But when the police arrived at my apartment, Guild was gone. There was no sign they had ever been there. Even after escaping Guild's terrifying visit, I couldn't shake the fear that gripped me. Every time my phone buzzed, I jumped, expecting another message from Guild. I knew I couldn't live like this, constantly looking over my shoulder. One night, as I tried to relax with a movie, my phone buzzed again. My heart raced as I picked it up. It was another message from Guild. "Miss me," it read. My hands shook as I typed a reply. "Leave me alone," I wrote, hoping they would get the message. But deep down, I knew it wouldn't be that easy. A few minutes later, there was a knock at the door. I froze, fear paralyzing me. The knocking continued, more insistent this time. I had to act. I grabbed a kitchen knife and slowly approached the door. "Who is it?" I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. "It's Guild," the voice replied. "Let me in." I opened the door a crack, peeking out to see Guild standing there, a smile on their face. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice trembling. Guild's smile widened. "I just want to see you. I missed our time together." I tightened my grip on the knife, not trusting them for a second. "You need to leave," I said firmly. "I don't want you here." Guild's eyes darkened, their smile fading. "You don't understand," they said, stepping closer. "You can't get rid of me that easily." I stepped back, feeling trapped. Guild pushed the door open and stepped inside, their presence filling the room. I knew I had to do something, anything to get away. "Why are you doing this?" I asked, trying to buy some time. Guild tilted their head, a sad look in their eyes. "Because I like you," they said softly, "and I don't want to be alone." I needed the plan to escape. I remembered the gold teeth Guild had given me. Maybe I could use them to bargain my way out. "Wait," I said, holding up the teeth. "Take these and leave me alone." Guild looked at the teeth, then back at me. "You think I want these?" they said, their voice cold. "I want you." Desperation filled me. I had to find another way. "What if I help you find someone else?" I asked, my mind racing. "Someone who will like you for who you are?" Guild's eyes narrowed. "You think you can do that?" I nodded, hoping they would buy it. "Yes, just give me some time." Guild seemed to consider this, then nodded slowly. "All right, but don't think you can trick me. I'll be watching." They left, and I collapsed onto the floor, shaking with relief. I knew I had to come up with a plan, and fast. The Guild wouldn't wait forever. I spent the next few days researching everything I could about Guild and the monster dating website. I found old forum posts and stories from people who had encountered similar creatures. Some had managed to escape, others had not. I decided to create a fake profile on the monster dating website, hoping to lure Guild into a trap. I set up a meeting at a public place where I knew there would be plenty of witnesses. I didn't want to take any chances. The night of the meeting, I arrived early, my heart pounding. I waited, watching for any sign of Guild. Finally, they appeared, looking around for me. I stepped out of the shadows, my hands shaking. "Here I am," I said, trying to sound confident. Guild's eyes lit up when they saw me. "You kept your promise," they said, smiling. I nodded, leading them to a table where I had set up a recording device. "I wanted to talk," I said, sitting down. "I need to know why you're doing this." Guild sat across from me, their expression serious. "I told you, I don't want to be alone." I pressed the record button, hoping to capture enough evidence to go to the police. "But why me?" I asked. "Why not someone else?" Guild sighed, looking down. "Because you're different. You didn't run away. You tried to understand." I realized then that Guild was more than just a monster. They were lonely, desperate for connection, but that didn't change what they were doing to me. I had to end this. I stood up, looking Guild in the eye. "This has to stop," I said firmly. "You need to leave me alone." Guild's eyes flashed with anger, but they nodded.
Fine.
"But remember, I'll always be watching." As they walked away, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. The nightmare was over, or so I hoped. After the terrifying encounter with Guild, I moved to a new city, hoping to leave the past behind. I changed my phone number, deleted my social media, and started over. It was a fresh start, and I was determined to make the most of it. I found a job at a local coffee shop, where the warm atmosphere and friendly customers helped me forget the horrors I had faced. I made new friends, and slowly, life began to feel normal again. But the fear of Guild never truly left me. I kept my guard up, always looking over my shoulder. One night, as I walked home from work, I felt a chill run down my spine. I turned to see a familiar figure standing under a streetlight. It was Guild. My heart raced, but I took a deep breath and approached them. "Why are you here?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Guild looked at me with those golden eyes, a sad smile on their face. "I came to say goodbye," they said softly. "I know I scared you, and I'm sorry. I just wanted someone to understand me." I felt a pang of sympathy for Guild. Despite everything, they were just a lonely creature seeking connection. "It's okay," I said, my voice gentle, "but you need to leave me alone." Guild nodded, their smile fading. "I understand. Goodbye." As they walked away, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. The nightmare was finally over. I returned to my apartment, feeling a sense of peace I hadn't felt in a long time. I knew I could move forward, free from the fear that had haunted me. After Guild's departure, I thought I was safe. But one night, I received a strange email from the monster dating website. "Your profile has been reactivated," it read. My heart raced as I realized the nightmare wasn't over. I deleted the email and blocked the sender, but the fear lingered. I knew I had to confront the source of this terror once and for all. I logged back into the website, determined to shut it down. As I navigated the site, I discovered a hidden section accessible only with a special code. The deeper I delved, the more disturbing the content became. Profiles of monsters, detailed descriptions of their powers, and discussions about their victims. I felt sick to my stomach. I found a chat room where users discussed upcoming dates. One name caught my eye, Guild. They were planning another encounter, this time with someone new. I had to stop it. I contacted the police, but they were skeptical. With no concrete evidence, they couldn't take action. Desperate, I decided to confront Guild myself. I set up a fake profile and arranged a meeting at a public place. hoping to catch them off guard. The night of the meeting, I waited nervously at a crowded cafe. Guild arrived, looking around for their date. I stepped forward, my heart pounding. "Guild," I called out. Guild's eyes widened in surprise. "You?" they said, their voice cold. "It's over," I said, trying to sound confident. "I know what you've been doing." Guild's expression darkened. "You shouldn't have come." Before I could react, they lunged at me. The cafe erupted in chaos as people screamed and scattered. I fought back, struggling to fend off Guild's attacks. Just as they overpowered me, the police arrived, tackling Guild to the ground. Guild was arrested, and the website was shut down. I felt a sense of relief, knowing the nightmare was finally over. I could move on with my life, free from the fear that had haunted me. With Guild behind bars and the monster dating website shut down, I felt a newfound sense of freedom. I continued my life in the new city, embracing the peace and safety I had longed for. The nightmares gradually faded, replaced by dreams of a brighter future. One day, as I walked through the park, I saw a familiar face. It was my sister, who I hadn't seen in years. We embraced, tears streaming down our faces. We had both survived our own horrors and come out stronger. Together, we started a new chapter, filled with hope and possibility. Story 3. A few years ago, I was moving from Cleveland to Minneapolis after a terrible year. My boyfriend had been involved in a scam, and I lost my job. Desperate for a fresh start, I took a Greyhound bus with just 2 suitcases. There were only 2 passengers left by the time we were near our destination, me and Noah, a kind-looking man in his early 60s. Suddenly, the bus swerved to avoid someone standing in the road, and we ended up in a ditch. Dazed, I made my way out of the bus and called the police. As I moved to the front, I saw Noah sitting in the field, cradling the bus driver and biting off pieces of his head. The police arrived and took Noah away without much struggle. He looked disappointed, like a child having his meal taken away. I was so distraught that I forgot one of my bags and crashed at the first motel I found. Over the next few weeks, I tried to settle into my new life, but I couldn't stop thinking about Noah. In the trial that followed, a psychologist explained that Noah believed he had been living in a forest, hunting people for food. His family, however, described him as a kind man with a busy schedule and no history of mental illness. Something must have happened on that bus. One day, I decided to unpack the bag I had taken from the bus. Inside, I found syringes, clear vials, plastic bags, duct tape, and knives. None of it was mine. My reflection in the mirror seemed different, too, like it had a mind of its own. I started receiving strange messages and noticed people watching me. I retraced my steps, driving back to the place where the bus had crashed. As I got closer, other figures emerged from the darkness. One of them, identical to me, whispered, "Go home. I'm done with this place." I realized that something had changed me, just like it had changed Noah. I returned to my new life, but things were never the same. Mirrors, dark rooms, and even my reflection became sources of fear. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, and I couldn't trust myself anymore. After the trial, I tried to move on with my life, but I couldn't forget what I had seen. Noah's calm face, the way he ate the bus driver, it haunted my dreams. Every night, I woke up in a cold sweat, and the image burned into my mind. I started seeing a therapist, hoping to find some peace, but even talking about it didn't help. The fear was always there, lurking in the back of my mind. One day, I received a message from an unknown number. "You saw too much," it read. My heart raced as I stared at the screen. Who could be sending these messages? I tried to ignore it, but the messages kept coming. "We know where you are," one said. "You can't hide," said another. I felt like I was being watched all the time. Every shadow, every sound. It all felt like a threat. I decided to go back to where it all started, I returned to the bus crash site, hoping to find some answers. As I walked through the field, I felt a chill run down my spine. I found a piece of the bus, broken and covered in rust. As I touched it, memories flooded back. The crash, Noah's face, the driver's screams. I knelt down, feeling the weight of it all. Suddenly, I heard a voice behind me. "You shouldn't have come back." I turned to see a figure standing in the shadows. It was Noah. He looked different, more haggard, but those calm eyes were the same. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice trembling. Noah stepped closer. "You need to forget. It's the only way to be safe." He reached out, and I backed away. "I can't," I said. "I can't forget." Noah sighed. "Then you leave me no choice." He lunged at me, and I ran, heart pounding. I didn't stop until I reached my car, speeding away as fast as I could. I knew then that I could never escape the horror of that day. Noah would always be there, a shadow in my mind, a ghost haunting my every step. After my encounter with Noah, I tried to return to a normal life. I moved to a new city, started a new job, and made new friends. But the memories of that day haunted me. I couldn't shake the image of Noah calmly eating the bus driver. I saw a therapist, trying to make sense of what had happened. They told me it was normal to feel this way after such a traumatic event. But their words didn't help. The fear was always there, lurking in the back of my mind. One day, I received a letter in the mail. It had no return address, and the handwriting was unfamiliar. Inside was a single piece of paper with a message, "You saw too much." My heart raced as I read the words. Who could have sent this? Was it Noah? Someone else? I didn't know what to think. I tried to ignore it, but the letters kept coming. "We know where you are," said one. "You can't hide," said another. I felt like I was being watched all the time. Every shadow, every sound. It all felt like a threat. I started noticing a figure following me. At first, I thought it was just my imagination, but soon it became clear. Someone was watching me, tracking my every move. I would see them in the corner of my eye, a dark silhouette blending into the shadows. One night, I decided to confront the stalker. I waited in an alley, my heart pounding. When the figure appeared, I stepped out, shining a flashlight on them. "Who are you?" I demanded. The figure stepped back, their face hidden in the darkness. "You need to forget," they said, their voice low and menacing. "It's the only way to be safe." I didn't recognize the voice, but the fear in my heart told me it was connected to Noah. "Why are you doing this?" I asked, my voice shaking. The figure didn't answer. They just turned and disappeared into the night, leaving me standing there, trembling with fear. I knew I had to end this. I couldn't live in fear forever. I decided to go back to where it all started, the place where the bus had crashed. Maybe there, I would find the answers I needed. I drove to the crash site, my hands gripping the steering wheel. The field was empty, the grass swaying in the wind. I stepped out of the car, feeling a chill run down my spine. As I walked through the field, I saw a figure standing by the remnants of the bus. It was Noah. He looked different, more haggard, but those calm eyes were the same. "You shouldn't have come back," he said, his voice echoing in the stillness. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice trembling. Noah stepped closer, his eyes filled with a strange sadness. "You need to forget," he said. "It's the only way to be safe." "I can't," I said. "I need to know the truth." Noah sighed, looking at the ground. "The truth is dangerous," he said. "It will destroy you." I stepped closer, feeling a strange sense of determination. "I don't care," I said. "I need to know." Noah looked up, his eyes meeting mine. "Then you're a fool," he said softly. "But I will tell you." He told me about the dark force that had taken over his mind, the voice that whispered to him, urging him to kill and eat. It had started long before the bus crash, a slow descent into madness. He had fought it, tried to resist, but the hunger was too strong. I listened, my heart breaking for him. He wasn't a monster. He was a victim, just like me. But that didn't change what he had done. I need to end this, I said, my voice firm. For both of us. Noah nodded, a sad smile on his face. I understand, he said. Do what you must. I stepped back, pulling out the knife I had brought with me. I knew what I had to do. As I moved towards him, Noah closed his eyes, accepting his fate. I took a deep breath and plunged the knife into his heart. As he fell to the ground, I felt a strange sense of peace. The nightmare was over. I had faced my fears and come out the other side. I left the field, leaving Noah and the dark memories behind. I knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but for the first time in a long time, I felt hope. The darkness had been defeated, and I was free. After the encounter with Noah, I struggled to find peace. The memories of that day haunted me, and I often woke up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat. I decided to seek help from a support group for trauma survivors. The group met once a week in a small, cozy room at the community center. We sat in a circle, sharing our stories and offering support to one another. It was comforting to know I wasn't alone, that others had faced their own demons and come out the other side. One evening, as I shared my story, I felt a sense of relief. The weight of the past seemed to lift, and I realized I was starting to heal. The group members listened with understanding and compassion, offering words of encouragement. Outside of the meetings, I found solace in simple activities. I took long walks in the park, read books, and spent time with friends. Slowly, life began to feel normal again. Months passed, and I felt stronger. The nightmares became less frequent, and the fear that had once gripped me loosened its hold. I decided it was time to take a step forward and face my past. I returned to the crash site, this time with a sense of determination. As I walked through the field, I felt a sense of closure. The ghosts of the past no longer haunted me. I whispered a silent farewell to Noah and the memories of that day. I knew it was time to embrace the future. I enrolled in a course to become a trauma counselor, hoping to help others who had faced similar horrors. It was my way of giving back, of finding purpose in my pain. The journey wasn't easy, but I found strength in helping others. Each story I heard, each person I helped, reminded me that healing was possible. The darkness that had once consumed me was replaced by a sense of hope and purpose. After the traumatic events with Noah, I decided to move to a new city. I found a small apartment and started a new job, hoping to leave the past behind. But the memories of that day lingered, haunting my dreams. I joined a support group for trauma survivors, where I met others who had faced their own horrors. Sharing my story helped, and I began to heal. I made new friends and started to rebuild my life. One evening, as I was walking home, I received a strange text message. "You can't escape," it read. My heart raced as I realized the nightmare wasn't over. I looked around, but the street was empty. I tried to ignore the message, but the fear grew. I knew I had to confront my past once and for all. I returned to the crash site, hoping to find closure. As I walked through the field where the bus had crashed, memories flooded back. I felt a presence behind me and turned to see Noah standing there, his eyes filled with sadness. "You shouldn't have come back," he said, his voice echoing in the stillness. "I need to understand," I replied, my voice trembling. "Why did you do it?" Noah sighed, looking down. "I was lost," he said. "Something took over me, and I couldn't control it." I felt a pang of sympathy for him. "Can you be free now?" Noah looked up, his eyes meeting mine. "Only if you forgive me." I took a deep breath, feeling a sense of peace wash over me. "I forgive you," I said. Noah smiled, tears in his eyes. Thank you. As he faded away, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. The nightmare was finally over. I could move on with my life, free from the fear that had haunted me. After my final confrontation with Noah, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. I returned to my new life, focusing on my work as a trauma counselor. Each day, I helped others find their own paths to healing, drawing strength from my own experiences. One evening, as I walked home, I received a message from an unknown number. My heart raced, but when I opened it, I found a simple note: "Thank you for understanding." I knew it was from Noah, a final message of gratitude and closure. I smiled, feeling at peace with my past. Story 4. In a small, quiet town, there was a lake surrounded by dense forest. The locals whispered tales of the haunted lake, where strange things happened after dark. They spoke of ghostly figures, eerie sounds, and people who went missing, never to be seen again. I had always been fascinated by these stories. One summer, I decided to investigate the lake for myself. Armed with a flashlight, a camera, and a notebook, I set out to uncover the truth. I pitched a tent by the lake and waited for nightfall. As the sun set, the lake became eerily still. The air was thick with tension, and I felt a chill run down my spine. I sat by the water's edge, listening to the sounds of the forest. The frogs croaked, and the owls hooted. But there was something else, a low, haunting hum that seemed to come from the lake itself. As darkness enveloped the lake, I saw a faint glow on the water's surface. Intrigued, I grabbed my flashlight and moved closer. The glow grew brighter, and I saw ghostly figures dancing on the water. They moved gracefully, their movements fluid and mesmerizing. I raised my camera, snapping pictures, but the figures vanished as soon as the flash went off. I stared at the empty lake, my heart pounding. Had I imagined it? I checked the photos, but there was nothing there. Frustrated, I decided to keep watch through the night. Around midnight, I heard a splash. I turned my flashlight toward the sound and saw a figure emerging from the water. It was a woman, her long hair dripping wet. She moved slowly, her eyes locked on mine. I felt a sense of dread wash over me as she approached. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice trembling. The woman didn't answer. She just stared at me with sad, empty eyes. I took a step back, my flashlight shaking in my hand. Suddenly, she let out a piercing scream, and I stumbled, falling to the ground. When I looked up, she was gone. Despite the terrifying encounter, I was determined to uncover the truth. The next night, I returned to the lake, more prepared. I set up a campfire and kept my flashlight and camera close. As the night deepened, the eerie hum returned, and the ghostly figures reappeared on the water. This time, I stayed still, watching them closely. They seemed to be performing a ritual, their movements synchronized and deliberate. I felt a strange pull as if they were calling to me. I resisted the urge to move closer, reminding myself to stay safe. Around midnight, the woman from the previous night appeared again. This time, she spoke. "Help us," she whispered, her voice filled with despair. "How?" I asked, desperate to understand. She pointed to the center of the lake. "Find the truth," she said before disappearing into the water. Determined to find answers, I decided to dive into the lake the next day. I borrowed diving gear from a local shop and prepared for the descent. As I swam to the center of the lake, I felt the water grow colder, and the eerie hum grew louder. I dove deeper, the darkness closing in around me. My flashlight cut through the murky water, revealing old, sunken structures. It looked like an ancient village, long forgotten. I explored cautiously, feeling a sense of unease. In the center of the village, I found a large stone altar, similar to the one I had seen in the haunted forest. Carved into the stone were the same strange symbols. As I examined the altar, I noticed a small, locked chest at its base. I brought it to the surface, eager to see what secrets it held. Back on land, I opened the chest. Inside, I found old, weathered documents and a locket. The documents told the story of the village and its people. They had performed dark rituals, calling upon spirits to protect their land. But something had gone wrong, and the spirits had turned against them. The locket contained a picture of the woman who had appeared to me. Her name was Eliza, and she was the village leader's daughter. She had tried to stop the rituals, but it was too late. The spirits had cursed the lake, trapping the villagers' souls forever. I knew I had to help the spirits find peace. I returned to the lake that night, carrying the locket and the documents. As I stood by the water's edge, I called out to Eliza. She appeared, her eyes filled with hope. "I found the truth," I said, holding out the locket. "How can I help you?" Eliza took the locket, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you," she whispered. "You must destroy the altar." I nodded, understanding what needed to be done. The next day, I returned to the lake with a sledgehammer. I dove to the bottom, feeling the weight of my mission. When I reached the altar, I swung the hammer with all my strength, breaking the stone into pieces. As the altar crumbled, I felt a surge of energy. The water around me grew warmer, and the eerie hum faded away. I surfaced, gasping for air, knowing I had done it. The spirits were free. The lake was no longer haunted. The eerie hum was gone, and the ghostly figures no longer appeared. The locals were amazed, and the town began to thrive again. I felt a sense of accomplishment, knowing I had helped Eliza and the other spirits find peace. I continued my work as an investigator, helping others uncover the truth behind haunted places. Each story was different, but the sense of fulfillment remained the same. I knew I was making a difference, one spirit at a time. Story 5. I had always been fascinated by old, abandoned houses. When I heard about the haunted house on Elm Street, I couldn't resist. The locals said it was cursed, that anyone who entered would never be the same. I decided to see for myself. One sunny afternoon, I stood before the house. It was a tall, imposing structure with broken windows and ivy-covered walls. As I pushed open the creaky front door, a chill ran down my spine. The air inside was cold and still, and the floorboards creaked under my feet. As I explored the house, I found a large, ornate mirror in the living room. It was covered in dust, and the glass was cracked in several places. I felt drawn to it, unable to look away. As I wiped away the dust, I saw my reflection staring back at me. But something was off. My reflection seemed to move on its own, its eyes filled with sadness. I stepped back, my heart pounding. The mirror seemed to hum with energy, and I knew there was something more to it. I decided to stay in the house that night, hoping to uncover its secrets. As darkness fell, the house grew colder. I set up a small camp in the living room, keeping the mirror in sight. I watched it closely, waiting for something to happen. Around midnight, the air grew heavy, and the room seemed to darken. I saw movement in the mirror. My reflection was gone, replaced by a shadowy figure. It looked like a woman, her long hair flowing around her. She moved closer, her eyes locking onto mine. "Help me," she whispered, her voice filled with despair. I felt a chill run down my spine. "How?" I asked, my voice trembling. The woman pointed to the mirror's frame. "Break the curse," she said before disappearing. The next day, I returned to town, searching for information about the house and the mirror. I visited the local library, digging through old records and newspapers. I found a story about a woman named Margaret who had lived in the house over a century ago. Margaret was said to have been a kind and beautiful woman, but she had fallen in love with a man who betrayed her. Heartbroken, she turned to dark magic, hoping to win him back. Instead, she cursed herself, trapping her soul in the mirror. I knew I had to help Margaret find peace. I returned to the house that night, determined to break the curse. I stood before the mirror, holding a small hammer. As I raised it, the air grew cold, and the shadowy figure of Margaret appeared. "Please," she whispered, "set me free." I took a deep breath and swung the hammer, shattering the mirror. The room filled with a bright light, and I felt a surge of energy. Margaret's spirit rose from the shards, her eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you," she said, her voice soft and peaceful. "I am free." As her spirit faded, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. The house was no longer haunted, and Margaret's soul was at rest. I left the house, knowing I had made a difference. Story 6. I had always loved camping. The fresh air, the sound of the wind in the trees, and the crackling of the campfire made me feel alive. One summer, I decided to go camping in a remote part of the forest, far from the noise of the city. I packed my gear and set out, hiking deep into the woods. The forest was dense and dark, but I felt a sense of adventure. I found a perfect spot by a small, clear stream and set up my tent. As the sun set, I lit a campfire and settled in for the night. As darkness fell, the forest grew eerily quiet. The only sound was the crackling of the fire and the occasional hoot of an owl. I sat by the fire, enjoying the peace and quiet. But as the night deepened, I began to hear whispers. At first, I thought it was just the wind, but the whispers grew louder, more distinct. They seemed to be coming from all around me, voices speaking in a language I couldn't understand. I felt a chill run down my spine, and the hair on my arms stood on end. I tried to ignore the whispers, but they wouldn't stop. I grabbed my flashlight and shone it into the darkness, but saw nothing. The whispers seemed to be inside my head, growing louder and more insistent. Suddenly, the whispers stopped, and the forest fell silent. I felt a presence behind me and turned to see a figure standing at the edge of the firelight. It was a man, tall and thin, with hollow eyes and a twisted smile. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice trembling. The man didn't answer. He just stared at me, his eyes filled with malice. I felt a wave of fear wash over me, and I backed away, stumbling over my gear. The man stepped closer, his smile widening. "You shouldn't be here," he said, his voice a low whisper. I grabbed my flashlight and shone it in his face, but he didn't flinch. Instead, he seemed to dissolve into the darkness, leaving me alone and terrified. I quickly packed up my gear and fled, not stopping until I reached my car. Despite the terror I felt that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that I needed to go back. I needed to understand what had happened. A few weeks later, I returned to the forest, this time with a friend for backup. We set up camp in the same spot, and I told my friend about the whispers and the strange man. He was skeptical, but agreed to keep watch with me that night. As darkness fell, we sat by the fire, waiting. The whispers returned, just as they had before. My friend heard them too, his face pale with fear. "What is that?" he asked, his voice shaking. "I don't know," I replied, "but it's real." The whispers grew louder, and the air grew colder. Suddenly, the man appeared again, his hollow eyes locked onto mine. "Leave," he whispered, his voice echoing through the forest. My friend and I grabbed our gear and fled, running through the forest in the darkness. We didn't stop until we reached the safety of our car, hearts pounding with fear. Back in town, we searched for answers. We learned that the forest had once been the site of a terrible tragedy. A village had stood there, and the villagers had practiced dark rituals, calling upon spirits to protect them. But the rituals had gone wrong, and the spirits had turned against them, trapping their souls in the forest. The man we had seen was one of the villagers, his soul cursed to wander the woods for eternity. The whispers were the voices of the trapped spirits, calling out for release. Determined to help, we returned to the forest one last time, armed with the knowledge of how to break the curse. We found the old village site, now overgrown and forgotten. In the center stood a stone altar, covered in strange symbols. We recited the words we had learned, calling upon the spirits to release the trapped souls. As we spoke, the air grew heavy, and the whispers grew louder. But we pressed on, determined to free the spirits. Suddenly, the air cleared, and the whispers stopped. The forest grew quiet, and we felt a sense of peace. The curse was broken, and the spirits were free. The forest was no longer haunted, and the whispers were gone. My friend and I felt a sense of accomplishment, knowing we had made a difference. We left the forest, vowing to never forget the lessons we had learned. I continued to explore haunted places, helping trapped spirits find peace. Each story was different, but the sense of fulfillment remained the same. I knew I was making a difference, one haunted place at a time. There was an old hotel on the outskirts of town, long abandoned and rumored to be haunted. The locals called it the Silent Hotel because no sound ever came from it, not even the wind. People said the hotel was cursed, and those who entered never came out the same. I had always been curious about the hotel and decided to investigate. Armed with a flashlight and a camera, I set out one evening to explore the mysterious building. The hotel loomed before me, its windows dark and empty. I pushed open the heavy front door and stepped inside. The lobby was covered in dust, and the air was cold and still. I shone my flashlight around, revealing old furniture and faded wallpaper. The silence was oppressive, and I felt a sense of unease. I took a deep breath and moved deeper into the hotel. As I explored, I heard faint whispers, almost too quiet to make out. They seemed to come from all directions, growing louder as I walked. I followed the sound, feeling a strange pull guiding me. The whispers led me to a large ballroom. The room was empty, but the whispers were louder here, echoing off the walls. I looked around, trying to find the source of the sound. In the center of the room stood a grand piano, covered in dust. I approached it, feeling a sense of dread. Suddenly, the piano keys moved on their own, playing a haunting melody. The whispers grew louder, and I saw shadowy figures dancing around the room. They moved gracefully, their forms flickering like candle flames. The figures continued to dance, their movements synchronized and eerie. I watched, unable to look away. One of the figures, a woman in a flowing dress, looked directly at me. Her eyes were filled with sadness, and she seemed to be pleading for help. I stepped forward, my heart pounding. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice echoing in the empty room. The woman pointed to a door at the far end of the ballroom. "Find the key," she whispered. Determined to help, I left the ballroom and began searching the hotel for the key. The whispers followed me, guiding me through the dark, empty halls. I entered a series of rooms, each filled with old, forgotten belongings. In one room, I found a small, ornate box. Inside was a rusty key. I returned to the ballroom, clutching the key. The ghostly dancers were still there, their movements more frantic. I approached the woman, holding out the key. "What does this open?" I asked. She pointed to a locked door behind the piano. "Set us free," she whispered. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The room was small and dark, with a single candle flickering on a table. In the center of the room stood a large, ornate mirror. As I approached, I saw my reflection, but there was something else, a shadowy figure standing behind me. I turned, but there was no one there. I looked back at the mirror and saw the figure again. It was the woman from the ballroom. "You must destroy the mirror," she said, her voice echoing in the small room. I hesitated, but then I understood. The mirror was the source of the curse, trapping the spirits in the hotel. I took a deep breath and smashed the mirror with the key. The glass shattered, and a bright light filled the room. As the light faded, the ghostly figures in the ballroom began to disappear, their forms dissolving into the air. The whispers stopped, and the hotel grew quiet. The oppressive silence was gone, replaced by a sense of peace. I left the hotel, feeling a sense of accomplishment. The spirits were free, and the curse was broken. The silent hotel was silent no more. I knew I had made a difference, and that gave me the strength to continue my work. I continued to explore haunted places, helping trapped spirits find peace. Each story was different, but the sense of fulfillment remained the same. I knew I was making a difference, one haunted place at a time. The experiences I had at the silent hotel stayed with me, reminding me of the importance of compassion and bravery in the face of fear. Story 7. I had always loved collecting old, unusual items. One day, I visited a small antique shop on the outskirts of town. The shop was filled with dusty treasures, each with its own story. As I browsed the shelves, I noticed a small, porcelain doll sitting in the corner. The doll had large, glassy eyes and a delicate, painted face. Something about it drew me in, and I decided to buy it. The shop owner warned me that the doll was rumored to be haunted, but I dismissed it as superstition. That night, I placed the doll on a shelf in my bedroom. As I drifted off to sleep, I heard a faint whisper. I sat up, looking around the room, but saw nothing. I lay back down, trying to ignore the unease that crept over me. The whispers grew louder, and I realized they were coming from the doll. I got up and moved the doll to the living room, hoping to get some sleep. But the whispers followed me, filling my mind with strange, unsettling words. The next day, I returned to the antique shop and asked the owner about the doll. He told me the doll had belonged to a little girl named Emily, who had died tragically many years ago. It was said that Emily's spirit was trapped inside the doll, seeking someone to help her find peace. I felt a chill run down my spine as I listened. Determined to help Emily, I began researching her story. I visited the local library and found old newspaper articles about her. Emily had been a sweet, kind girl, but she had drowned in a nearby lake under mysterious circumstances. I decided to visit the lake where Emily had died. It was a quiet, peaceful place, but I felt a sense of unease as I approached the water's edge. I held the doll tightly, hoping to connect with Emily's spirit. As I stood by the lake, the whispers grew louder. I felt a presence behind me and turned to see a ghostly figure of a little girl. She looked at me with sad, glassy eyes, just like the doll's. "Emily?" I whispered, my voice trembling. The ghost nodded. "Help me," she said, her voice filled with sorrow. I knew I had to perform a ritual to set Emily's spirit free. I researched various methods and decided on a simple ceremony involving candles and a chant. That night, I returned to the lake with the doll and the necessary items. I set up the candles in a circle and placed the doll in the center. As I recited the chant, the air grew cold and the wind picked up. Emily's ghost appeared, her eyes filled with hope. "Thank you," she whispered as her form began to fade. I continued the chant, feeling a surge of energy. The candles flickered, and the doll's eyes seemed to sparkle. Finally, Emily's spirit was released, and the doll fell silent. I felt a sense of peace wash over me as I finished the ritual. Emily's spirit was free, and the whispers were gone. I returned the doll to the antique shop, knowing it was no longer haunted. The shop owner thanked me, and I left feeling a sense of accomplishment. I had helped a lost soul find peace, and that gave me the strength to continue my work. With Emily's spirit freed and the doll returned to the antique shop, I felt a sense of accomplishment. I continued to explore haunted places, helping trapped spirits find peace. Each story was different, but the sense of fulfillment remained the same. One day, I visited the antique shop and saw a new doll on the shelf. It was a gift from the shop owner, a reminder of the work I had done. I took it home, knowing it would always remind me of Emily and the importance of compassion and bravery. Story 8. I had just moved into a new house, a charming old Victorian with creaky floors and lots of character. I loved the history of the place, and I was excited to make it my own. But from the first night, I felt something was off. I heard strange noises coming from the attic, like footsteps and whispers. At first, I thought it was just the house settling, but the noises grew louder and more persistent. One evening, I decided to investigate. I climbed the narrow stairs to the attic, my flashlight cutting through the darkness. The attic was filled with old furniture and dusty boxes. As I explored, I felt a chill run down my spine. In the corner of the attic, I saw a shadowy figure. It was tall and thin, its eyes glowing in the darkness. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice trembling. The figure didn't answer. It just stared at me, its eyes filled with malice. I backed away slowly, not wanting to provoke it. The next day, I visited the local library to research the history of the house. I found old newspaper articles about a man named Victor who had lived there many years ago. Victor had been a recluse, known for his strange behavior. He had disappeared under mysterious circumstances, and some believed his spirit still haunted the house. I also found a journal written by Victor, detailing his descent into madness. He wrote about seeing shadowy figures and hearing whispers. He believed he was being watched, and his paranoia grew until he vanished. Determined to confront the shadowy figure, I returned to the attic that night. I brought a candle and Victor's journal, hoping to communicate with his spirit. As I lit the candle, the shadowy figure appeared again. "Victor," I called out, holding up the journal. "I know you're here." The figure moved closer, its eyes locking onto mine. "Leave," it whispered, its voice echoing in the darkness. "I want to help you," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "You don't have to be alone." The figure seemed to hesitate, its eyes softening. "Help me," it whispered. I knew I had to perform a ritual to set Victor's spirit free. I researched various methods and decided on a simple ceremony involving candles and a chant. That night, I returned to the attic with the necessary items. I set up the candles in a circle and began the chant. The air grew cold, and the wind picked up. The shadowy figure appeared, its eyes filled with hope. "Thank you," it whispered as its form began to fade. I continued the chant, feeling a surge of energy. The candles flickered, and the attic seemed to come alive. Finally, Victor's spirit was released, and the shadowy figure disappeared. I felt a sense of peace wash over me as I finished the ritual. Victor's spirit was free, and the attic was no longer haunted. I could finally enjoy my new home without fear. I continued to explore haunted places, helping trapped spirits find peace. Each story was different, but the sense of fulfillment remained the same. I knew I was making a difference, one haunted place at a time. With Victor's spirit freed and the attic no longer haunted, I finally felt at home in my new house. The creaky floors and old furniture no longer felt eerie, but comforting. I embraced the history of the place, knowing it was now filled with light and peace. I continued my work, helping others find their own peace in haunted places. Each investigation brought new challenges, but also new rewards. I knew I was making a difference, one spirit at a time. Story 9. In a small, sleepy town, there was an old railway line that had been abandoned for years. The locals whispered stories of a phantom train that still ran on the tracks, carrying lost souls to the afterlife. Intrigued, I decided to investigate. One evening, I walked along the overgrown tracks, my flashlight cutting through the darkness. The air was thick with tension, and I felt a chill run down my spine. I had heard the stories, but I didn't really believe them. At least, not until I heard the distant sound of a train whistle. As I stood on the tracks, the sound grew louder. The ground began to shake, and I saw a faint light in the distance. The phantom train was coming. I felt a mix of fear and excitement as I watched it approach. The train was old and rusty, its windows dark and empty. As it passed by, I saw shadowy figures inside, their eyes glowing with a strange light. One figure stood out, a woman with a sad, distant look on her face. She seemed to be looking right at me. "Help us," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the sound of the train. Determined to uncover the truth, I visited the local library to research the history of the railway line. I found old records and newspaper articles about a tragic accident that had occurred many years ago. A train had derailed, killing everyone on board. It was said that their spirits still haunted the tracks, unable to move on. I also found a diary belonging to the woman I had seen on the train. Her name was Sarah, and she had been traveling to reunite with her husband. The diary detailed her journey and the tragic accident that had taken her life. I decided to visit the old train station, now abandoned and overgrown with weeds. The station was eerily quiet, and I felt a sense of unease as I walked through the empty building. I found an old ticket booth and a waiting room, both covered in dust. As I explored, I heard faint whispers, like voices carried on the wind. The air grew colder, and I felt a presence behind me. I turned to see the shadowy figure of Sarah, her eyes filled with sorrow. "Help us," she whispered again. I knew I had to help Sarah and the other lost souls find peace. I researched various methods and decided on a simple ceremony involving candles and a chant. That night, I returned to the railway tracks with the necessary items. I set up the candles in a circle and began the chant. The air grew thick with energy, and the ground began to shake. The phantom train appeared, its ghostly light cutting through the darkness. Sarah stepped off the train, her eyes locking onto mine. "Thank you," she whispered as her form began to fade. I continued the chant, feeling a surge of energy. The train's whistle grew louder, and the shadowy figures inside began to disappear. Finally, the train vanished, taking the lost souls with it. I felt a sense of peace wash over me as I finished the ritual. The phantom train was gone, and the tracks were no longer haunted. I had helped Sarah and the other lost souls find peace. I continued to explore haunted places, helping trapped spirits move on. Each story was different, but the sense of fulfillment remained the same. I knew I was making a difference, one haunted place at a time. With the phantom train and its lost souls finally at peace, the old railway tracks were no longer a place of fear. The town began to thrive again, and the stories of the phantom train became part of local folklore. I continued to explore haunted places, helping spirits find their way. Each journey brought new discoveries and new stories to tell. I knew I was on the right path, making a difference in the lives of those who needed it most. As I looked back on my journey, I realized how far I had come. From the haunted cabin in Alaska to the phantom train, each experience had shaped me into who I was. I had faced my fears, helped others, and found a sense of purpose. I stood at the edge of a cliff, watching the sunrise. The sky was painted with hues of pink and gold, a symbol of new beginnings. I took a deep breath, feeling the cool morning air fill my lungs. The past was behind me, and the future stretched out before me, filled with endless possibilities. I smiled, knowing that whatever came next, I was ready. The world was full of mysteries and haunted places, and I would be there to uncover their secrets and bring peace to those who needed it. My journey was far from over, but I embraced it with open arms, ready for whatever adventures lay ahead.